Hi, everybody. I'm so glad that this worked out easily because I'm so technologically challenged that usually I have a hard time getting things to work easily. So welcome, and I hope you'll enjoy the hour that we're going to be spending together. And I know that many of you are at different time frames and some of you are in different countries. So welcome. It should be a fun time to be together. The topic of attention deficit disorder is a really important topic, even though it's not a new topic. It's been around for a long time, and most of us think we've known about it. It's funny because I've been in education now for 40 years, and I've watched it go through two cycles. One cycle where everybody was referring and they were putting everybody on medication. And then what happened is that a lot of children did not improve with medication, and the whole concept of attention deficit disorder came under dispute. And then there was a period where children weren't medicated. And now we're back into a period where attention deficit disorder and medication is back in vogue. Matter of fact, it's reached epidemic proportions, particularly in the United States, where, as I've said on here, about 3 to 5% of the children, or approximately 2 million children, are presently being diagnosed as having either attention deficit, ADD, or ADHD. Some of the frightening statistics are the fact that there has been a 500% increase in diagnosis since 1990. So some of the topics we're going to talk about today is the whole issue of diagnosis. Is it objective or subjective? We're going to look at issues of medication. Is it good or bad? And even go back into the whole concept of, is attention deficit disorder real or not real? And then finally, I want to talk about other causes that can create the same types of behavior as what we are labeling as attention deficit disorder. And I'm going to list as many as I can. I'm going to talk about a few in detail and also include Irlen syndrome as one of those underlying causes that can look like attention deficit disorder. But I never want anyone to think that the Irlen method is the only issue. It is just a piece of the puzzle. So I am going to mention and talk about other causes and underlying causes that we need to be aware of. ADD is neurological. It's brain-based, and that's important, especially in the United States. You need to have a medical diagnosis. School district cannot diagnose ADD or ADHD. Why is that an issue? Because many parents, especially here in the U.S., really want to have that diagnosis because it provides for their children special accommodations that they couldn't get otherwise. For a child to have these accommodations, typically you need to have a learning disability, which is a discrepancy between your performance and achievement. And many children who have ADD do not meet the criteria of having that kind of a discrepancy. So ADD is a diagnostic criteria. It's under OHI, which is under other health impairments. And that's how the children are then being able to be provided with special accommodations because they have this problem. But it is a medical issue and must be diagnosed by medical doctors, because one of the primary ways it's being treated is with medication. There's a couple of factors that we want to talk about, and one is the fact that there really, even though it is a medical issue, there are no medical tests like blood tests that we can use to diagnose attention deficit disorder. There are ways of doing it now. Many times it's done with interview, by the physician that may last 10 or 15 minutes. Many times it's done by self-tests that are filled out by the parent and the teacher, and based on this reported information, the physician makes a diagnosis of attention deficit disorder. So it's more subjective than objective, and many times this can lead to overdiagnosis, and it can lead to misdiagnosis. One fact that I want to make you aware of is that about a third of those who are prescribed medication do not do well on the medication. Either it creates significant side effects, or the child gets worse, or there is no improvements whatsoever. Now, it's my own opinion that this indicates possibly that about a third of those who are being diagnosed are being either misdiagnosed or overdiagnosed. And that's pretty frightening. Here in the U.S., we are medicating 4 times higher than in Europe and in other countries. There's a real push for there to be an easy solution. And often the teacher is the one who's saying, you know what, I'm having a hard time getting this child's attention, the child isn't trying hard enough, and the teacher is the one that's pushing the parents to get a diagnosis of ADD or ADHD because they want them medicated. I've even heard some professionals say they just want calm, quiet kids in the classroom, and they don't care how they get it, and they would like to have them medicated. And I don't think that's fair. I think the reason the teachers want this kind of intervention for the children is they really feel that it would be helpful for the child and that they would benefit from it. But the medication has side effects, and we'll talk about it. And we're going to talk about the fact that you can have similar behaviors but have different causes. Let me stop for a second and say, as you are listening to me, and if this, I really prefer to talk in person, so if you have a question, you can raise your hand and we can talk about it and discuss it. But here, if you have a question, please type it in and send it to David, and we will discuss it at the end. But so you don't forget, just type it in now as I'm talking. Anything you want to know more about, or question what I said, or want me to clarify. Okay. First of all, as I said, even though this whole concept of attention deficit disorder has been around for 30 years, it's not clear that everybody believes that it's real. You will still read articles where they're saying there is no such thing as attention deficit disorder. The child just has a behavior problem and needs to be given limits and structures and learn how to pay attention better. It's even been implied that it's really related to bad parenting, that you have parents who haven't set limits and structure for these children, so they come into the classroom and they're misbehaving. I think, though, after 30 years and how many millions and millions of children have been medicated and many of them have improved, you can't say that this is not real. There is a true medical problem, and there's been research done looking at the brain showing that the brain patterns of those children who have, or even adults who have attention deficit disorder is definitely different. Some of the most interesting research in terms of just not even verifying that attention disorder exists and that they have different brain patterns has been done by Dan Amen using SPECT scans, where they look at blood flow to the brain to determine areas that are overactive and areas that are underactive, so that the child is not able to perform well, and it kicks in a lot of the issues that we have labeled as ADD, ADHD. One of the things that his research has shown is the fact that you don't have just one type of attention deficit, and that there are at least 7 different types, and each one you need to look at a different type of medication, that if you use Ritalin with every child that has been labeled, you're using the wrong type of medication for many of the children, and they are not going to improve. So, my opinion is it's definitely real. It is definitely a brain-based problem. Possibly one of the reasons that where a lot of people are skeptical about it is because of the overdiagnosis and the misdiagnosis. So what kind of behaviors make someone think that this person the student may or should be labeled or may have attention deficit disorder? Well, we've all heard about them, so we'll just take a quick moment to review them. One, these are individuals who are constantly looking up, looking away, have difficulty focusing, difficulty with what I call sustained attention and concentration. They can't do it for any periods of time. They're getting up, they're walking around, they're starting to work, and anything will distract them away from the task so they don't stay focused. And then you have the hyperactivity impulsive component that goes along with the diagnosis of ADHD. So these kids are constantly fidgeting and moving and up and down and in and out of their seats and squirming. And those are the children who we label as ADHD. Interesting, I think it's much easier to pick up those who have ADHD than those who have just ADD. Many children who have ADD are being missed. They're quiet, they're not acting out, they're not hyperactive. They can do what I call fake behaviors so that people are not aware of the fact that they're inattentive, are not aware of the fact that they're not paying attention. They can be daydreaming in class and it's hard to pick it up. They can be losing focus and coming in and out of focus while they're doing tasks, but they're not hyperactive, and so it may be difficult to pick up this type of child. Additionally, when we work with children who are adolescents who have ADD and are complaining about it, you don't see the behaviors, and literally they're the only ones who can tell you if it makes a difference and things change or improve with medication. And there's no reason why not trying the medication in this instance. If the child keeps complaining, I can't stay focused, and we've gone through all the other possibilities and we're not seeing any other type of problem or underlying cause, because typically most of the medications that are being prescribed are in and out of the system in a day. They don't stay in the system and they don't build up. So you don't have to titrate them up to find out if they're going to work, nor do you have to be very careful about slowly weaning or taking the child off the medication. You can try it and see. So, why is it so important? Well, besides the fact that they can have accommodations, and usually the accommodations that are most requested by parents for these children at school is for them to have extended time for tests and for standardized testing. But there are concerns beyond that, such as the fact that if you have attention deficit disorder, it's going to affect your ability to perform in school. You're not going to be able to do as well. But besides school, it can affect you in terms of your being able to form relationships and keep relationships with other people. If you don't do well in school and you have a difficult time having friends and keeping friends, it also contributes to low self-esteem. When we look at the brains of those who have been diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, we usually see the front or prefrontal lobe of the brain being underactive and not functioning well. And that's the area of the brain that we call executive functioning, where we do our planning, where we do our time management and organization. And we see often that these children have trouble with organization and time management, in addition to having difficulties planning and finishing assignments. So they're the kids that come home and mom says, "Where are your books?" And they go, "Oh, well, I have one, but I didn't take all the books I need." Where's your homework? Oh, I can't find the paper where I wrote it down. They come to school, they did their homework, they forgot their homework and it's at home, or they forget to turn it in. So this whole concept of organization is very difficult. And there's a lot of tricks that have been designed in terms of color coding and providing them with folders to help with this issue of organization and time management and planning. Let's go back to the diagnosis and being subjective and basically based on checklists from parents and teachers, because it's one of the reasons why you're basing it purely on behaviors, and behaviors can have many different causes or contributing factors, and we're going to go into that. And some of you, when I've said subjective, go, well, wait a minute. There are less subjective ways of determining, A, if somebody has attention deficit disorder, and B, if the medication dosage is appropriate and they're getting the benefits that they need. One way is through using computerized testing. One of the most popular is called TOVA, T-O-V-A. If you have never seen what they do with TOVA, it's very long and very tedious and very boring. And they're doing it on the computer and they're staring at a computer screen. And I know some of you who are listening to me are Irlen screeners and go, and that kind of raises a red flag because you're saying, wait a minute, I know if someone has Irlen that they're going to get strain or fatigue and not be able to focus, particularly on the computer. It's going to be very difficult for them. So then you have to stop and say, gee, if you have Irlen syndrome, is this type of computerized testing going to be accurate? Because it may be picking up those who have Irlen, not those who have ADD, or even those that have both ADD and Irlen syndrome. But it is a more objective way of determining whether somebody has this problem. And also remember, they use it again after they start the medication to see if there's improvements and the type of improvements to determine if the medication is working the way it should or it needs to, the child needs more medication. But medication can have side effects, like anything you take. Some of the side effects to be aware of is decreased appetite. And this was a real concern, especially when Ritalin came out and the kids weren't hungry and they weren't eating much. Many of the parents then, to combat the fact that they had a decreased appetite and there were some concerns about growth and growth patterns, to combat that, they would have the child not take the medication on weekends or not take the medication during the summer. We also now have long-lasting medications, so they're not having to take pills in the morning and then pills again at lunchtime. For some children, there's weight loss. For others, insomnia. Some get even abdominal pains. And then you have things like personality changes where the children will just say, I don't feel like myself. I just feel totally different. In addition, it can create more serious issues which are rare, such as anxiety, irritability, and even involuntary tic activity. So you need to be aware of this and pay attention. How one prescribes the medication is also, I think, pretty subjective. In a lot of instances, the physician is prescribing the medication that he's most used to prescribing. He doesn't do it based, there's no way he can look at you and say, gee, I think you're a good candidate for Concerta or Ritalin or a totally different type of medication that's typically not used for attention deficit disorder, because we're going to other medications now that seem to be more helpful for some children. So a lot of times what happens is the medication is pretty subjective. It's done by personal preference of the physician, And it's done on a trial and error basis, such as if this medication is not going to work, well, let's switch and try this medication. Or there's a new medication on the market, so let's switch and try that. In addition, another method is if the medication is not working, let's just increase the dosage. And a lot of times that's what they do. They'll increase the dosage until they get to the point where they're starting to see negative side effects, and then they know that they're just above where they need to be, and then they'll reduce the level of the medication. So there really is not a blood test that can say, hey, the medication is the right dosage. It again becomes pretty subjective. Even determining whether we want to add medications or what's going to be the effect of putting medications together. A lot of doctors are afraid to combining medications, and with some individuals they get the best response not with just one medication but different medications. What I've seen when I've seen Dan Amen's scans is the fact that it is a much more objective way of determining whether someone needs medication, the type of medication they need, or the combinations of medications. So when you have somebody, this is really a severe issue, and medication, you've been through medication after medication after medication or combinations of medications, and it's not working and the kid's behavior is really out of control, really do think about the Amen clinics, and you can find them online. It's AMEN. Okay, so what else can create the same type of behaviors in terms of just high distractibility, difficulty starting tasks and stopping tasks, difficulty staying with tasks? Well, certain medications can, and I don't mean just attention deficit medications. You can have side effects from other medications. You can have allergic reactions. You can have dietary sensitivities, and we're going to talk about that in a minute in greater detail. You have to be aware of the fact as well that undetected visual and hearing problems can create the same effect. That's why it's important, if you would suspect that your child's vision is inappropriate, or is not inappropriate, but the child is struggling visually, that you don't depend just on the nurse's evaluation that's being done through the school or the school nurse, that you take them to an optometrist or an ophthalmologist and have a good visual exam. That having your child's hearing tested can be done today at a very young age, and you want to make sure that there are no visual or hearing problems. Obviously, when you have a child that's struggling in school, that has academic difficulties of any type, they're not going to want to do the work. They know they can't do it. They know that it's hard. It just makes them feel dumb and stupid. So what's going to happen? You're going to see these kids resisting, avoiding. You're going to see them being easily distracted because it's so hard to do it. So we do also want to look at and make sure that we have no undetected reading problems or learning difficulties. Sensory sensitivities, and you can have a whole bunch of sensory sensitivities, including smells, which is usually not thought about, and the smells that are the most bothersome in the classroom are usually the markers they use to write on the boards, because they can trigger headaches and stomach aches and nausea and dizziness and make it difficult for the child to attend and concentrate. Some children are very noise sensitive, and if you sit them or they're in a classroom, we used to have years ago what's called open classrooms, and you can hear the teachers from classroom to classroom, and you can hear the children, and you had children who could not attend and concentrate. They were so highly distracted. I'm sorry, excuse me. They were so highly distracted by the noise that they couldn't attend and concentrate. Emotional problems, divorces, children facing emotional issues have problems in class, paying attention. and are easily distracted. Sugar is a real controversial issue. And I guess my opinion here is that it's controversial because sugar doesn't affect everybody in the same way. So that for years people would say sugar can make you hyperactive. Don't, reduce the sugar. If your child's hyperactive, take them off of sugar. Within the last, a year or two, they did a major study and came up with the fact that, nope, sugar doesn't cause distractibility or hyperactivity. I think part of that, and I have to tell you, the reaction from parents that I have worked with who have kids who go off the wall with sugar, they become irritable, they become hyperactive, they can't sit still, say to you, I can't believe that study. I look at my kids, I can see what happens to them when they have sugar. And it doesn't have to be a whole lot of sugar like at Halloween. Just even a little bit of sugar can create those problems. Any of these issues are individual, and they don't go across the board for everybody. And when you have problems that don't affect the majority of the population, then research doesn't validate the fact that they can affect. You need to affect at least the majority of the population for the research to show that this is a real problem. And I think that's what happened with sugar. For some children, sugar really can make them antsy and fidgety and overactive. There's been research that has come out of working with those on the autistic spectrum, and looking at the fact that a lot of their behavior problems and behavior control issues are related to gluten and casein. And that once you take gluten and casein out of the diet, you see a much quieter child who is less distracted and has an easier time concentrating. If you haven't heard anything about gluten and casein, take a look online and get some information about gluten and casein. It doesn't apply to everybody. And there are ways to determine if it applies to your child. In terms of food, one of the easiest ways to tell if this affects your child's behavior is to do an elimination diet. What you need to be aware of is the fact that you cannot just eliminate the food for a day or a week and see if there's a behavior change, because things stay in the system for a lot longer. You need to take it totally out of the child's diet for at least a month. Even a little bit re-triggers everything. So you have to wait a whole month and take it totally out to be able to see if this is going to make a major improvement in their behavior and in their attention. Years ago, Feingold came up with the concept that food additives, food dyes, and food preservatives created hyperactivity and distractibility in children. And then, again, like sugar, this was dismissed because it didn't apply to every child who was labeled as having ADD or ADHD. This is a hard one for me as well personally because I have someone in my family who with red food dye does projectile vomiting. Yet if you get onto your government websites, the latest research says, nope, no negative reactions to food additives, food dyes, or food preservatives. And I'm constantly typing back to the FDA and saying, gee, as a parent, you need to know that that's not quite true. I also find it interesting that Europe has banned food additives, food dyes, and food preservatives, yet we can't do that in this country, even though it would be helpful for a certain percent of the population. So let's talk about another area that can create these kinds of problems, and that's eating patterns. There are some people who can go with one meal a day. There are some people who can eat 3 meals a day and nothing happens. And yet there are other people who need to eat not just 3 meals a day, but they also need to snack in between. Because if they don't, they can get headaches or dizzy or moody or stomach aches. They can become tired and irritable and shaky, lightheaded, grouchy, and active. They can have one of these symptoms or all of these symptoms, all of which make them look like they have attention deficit disorder. So there's a whole variety of symptoms can kick in for some people when they don't eat frequently enough. This problem is hereditary, so if either you or your husband find that you feel better if you snack in between, okay, thanks. Okay, so that if you snack in between, then look at your children and think about it. Concept here is that you eat small meals frequently, that you don't use your body to tell you that you're hungry. Some people, so what you do is when you have your first symptom that says you're hungry, you're literally an hour past where you should have eaten. So some people need to be snacking and eating every 2 hours, some people every 2.5 hours. Typically, if you have this pattern, it's every 2 to 2.5 hours. And there's a third thing that you need to know, and that is your body needs more protein. And you can eat the protein or drink the protein. You can have smoothies or protein drinks or almonds or beef jerkies. There's a whole variety of ways of getting your protein, but add protein not just to every meal, but in every snack as well. It's not how much you have. It's just pacing it out and keeping you level, and that's what's going to stop the physical symptoms that create the difficulty with distractibility and attention, because you don't feel well, and so you just can't sustain. I mentioned food sensitivities before, and we talked about sugar being real for some people, gluten, wheat, dairy. The most common are sugar, wheat, and dairy. But what I want to point out to you is that any food may create this type of, can create physical symptoms and fidgetiness and inactivity. Any foods. I've had children come in and parents say, gee, citrus and oranges and strawberries, which are really strange. You wouldn't think that those kinds of foods would create these kinds of problems. So the easiest thing to do is watch your child, and if after eating your child starts to look more hyper and more fidgety and more active, do a food journal and track what that child ate. And keep a food journal, and you'll start to see the foods that are the most which food keeps coming up every time you see this behavior. So it's one way of looking at it. And I also talked to you about food dyes, food additives, and food preservatives. And if you want more information about that, I gave you Feingold's website. And it's hard because I talked, and then you didn't hear some of it. So I don't know what I said and what I didn't say about food additives, preservatives, and food dyes. I quickly want to mention again, this isn't going to affect everybody, but there is certain people that it's a problem. For the FDA doesn't believe it, although in Europe they have eliminated food additives, food preservatives, and food dyes because they're aware that it creates a problem. I get online every once in a while and get mad at the FDA because my own son does projectile vomiting with red food dyes. So I'm very aware that it can create problems, and that we should be paying attention to this. Again, we're not going to pay attention to anything unless it affects at least the majority of the population. And none of these issues are going to affect the majority of the population, or we would have done something about it already. Okay? Allergies, medication, and psychological issues can become a problem. Difficulties are starting tasks, staying on task, avoiding. We've talked about all of that. Okay. What else can you do? Well, these are other suggestions, and if you want to avoid medication, even though your child may need medication, people have found success with counseling. Behavior modification, neurofeedback, and biofeedback are used frequently to help children who have ADD or ADHD and the parents do not want to try medication with them. Dietary changes, fish oil supplements, omega, all these kids should be on some type of omega-3s and 6s, and exercise is very helpful. And Irlen spectral filters may be a solution for some children that we're misdiagnosing. So now I get to talk a little bit about Irlen, okay? With Irlen, it's environmental stimuli that are going to trigger this behavior. You're going to see the behavior occurring when they're reading and doing other visually intensive activities. You're going to see this behavior when they're under fluorescent lighting, even maybe when they're not reading, just sitting and listening, or working on the computer. So you're not going to see this type of behavior all the time. There are going to be specific times that this behavior is going to be triggered. Lighting, for those who have Irlen syndrome, is a real trigger. The worst lighting is obviously fluorescent lighting, but bright lighting is just as bad. And you don't have to be working under the lighting for it to create problems. And I've listed some of the things that can happen for individuals who have Irlen syndrome under fluorescent lighting. They can feel sick, they can feel dizzy and headaches and nauseous and irritable and anxious. Again, when it's related to Irlen, it's going to be inherited. And so look at yourself and think, if either you or your husband find that you have difficulty under fluorescent lighting, then carefully look at your children, because they may have inherited it as well. And we don't want to misdiagnose and give children medication who do not need medication. What happens a lot of times is under the fluorescent lighting is the kids feel so sick, or it's so difficult to sustain attention that they daydream. So the teacher is saying they're daydreaming, they're not focusing, they're not paying attention. Some of the children get headaches and feel sick, so they put their head down on the desk. And the teacher again is saying they're not paying attention. You can see some of the children and adults, and I'm saying this is not just children, because we obviously, if you have a problem, it's going to stay with you for a lifetime. So on the workplace, if you're under fluorescent lighting, you're going to have the same type of symptoms and not being able to attend or concentrate as well. Kids in class feel that way. They feel irritable just sitting there. They don't feel good. They're going to get up. They're going to walk around. They're going to talk to their neighbors. They're going to disturb their neighbors. And now we're going to label them as having ADHD. So I've kind of talked about what we see often with these kids, that some of them will find that their eyes and their head hurts them under the lighting, makes it hard to concentrate and pay attention. They can't sit still, they can't complete the work. They put their head down, they close their eyes, they look away. They want to get out of the room. Some of the kids are even not willing to stay in the classroom and think of excuses to go to the bathroom, to get up, to go to the nurse's office, because they're so bothered by just the lighting itself. There may be a tendency, as another way of identifying it, that these are the children that when they're at home, they prefer to be in rooms with dim lighting. When they're working, they prefer to have dim lighting. And typically, as parents, we're always going in there and turning the lights on under the misassumption that brighter lighting is better and that dim lighting will hurt their eyes when they're reading or trying to do any kind of visually intensive activity. By the way, that's a myth. And one of the best things that I've ever heard is an ophthalmologist, when asked the question, is dim lighting going to hurt your eyes, say, does whispering hurt your ears? I just picked one case study to quickly mention to you. This was during testing, when we were testing, that the client became aware for the first time that he got headaches and became dizzy, tired, irritable, nervous and anxious when reading, doing computer work, or just sitting under fluorescent lights. And therefore, we could say and change the behavior immediately by turning off the lights and watching this individual calm down, be able to focus, attend, and pay attention to what we were saying. What you have to know is most people are not aware of the fact that they're bothered by fluorescent lighting. Even adults are not aware that they're bothered by fluorescent lighting. We're aware that sunlight creates physical symptoms, but what we're not aware of is the fact that our brain interprets sunlight, fluorescent lights, bright lights, the brightness from white paper, whiteboards, reading, doing visually intensive activities exactly in the same way, and it kicks in exactly the same physical symptoms. Okay? So that's a little bit, you should remember that, all right? One-on-one correlation between the physical symptoms you get with sunlight, bright lights, fluorescent lights particularly is more of a trigger, doing visually intensive activities, lights at night, computers, all the same, and the same problems. Here's another case study, and this is Ashley. Ashley had problems focusing in class. What she would do is she would talk rather than doing her work. She'd daydream and appear not to be interested in school. In 6th grade, she was given medication, but the parents then decided to stop the medication because it literally changed her personality, and that wasn't worth it for them. What we found out when we tested her was sitting in the class under the lights, things in her environment started to close in, to move, to glow brightly, to disappear and reappear, and to change in shape. Think about how you would feel and how your body would react if you were sitting there looking at the teacher and she was glowing, moving in and out, changing, things were closing in. She would feel dizzy, and she would constantly be looking away. She couldn't focus, and she couldn't concentrate. She looked fidgety, antsy, and anxious. But she didn't know what was happening or that she needed to tell anybody about it. Instead, teachers kept pushing her parents to medicate her. They chose, after seeing the fact that the medication was negative, to look at other avenues and got on to www.erlin.com and did the check sheet and realized, because we have some self-tests, that, that her problem was Erlin and difficulty with the physical symptoms that were triggered by lighting and visually intensive activities. If you have Erlin, and you're reading and doing other academic tasks, what can happen is that the print can change, the print can distort, the print can disappear, the print can move, and again, it can kick in a whole array of physical symptoms, including eye strain and eye pain, your head hurting, tiredness and fatigue, anxiety and irritability. And what are you going to do? The harder you try, the worse it gets. It's like pedaling harder and going backwards, and you don't understand anything anyway, and you don't comprehend, and it's too painful and it hurts. So what are you going to do? You're not going to stay on task. You're going to stop looking. In addition, for those of you who are listening to this, and realize that if you read at some point, when you read, things start going in and out of focus, or it starts to get uncomfortable, and that if you take a break, and then go back to doing it, the symptoms will stop for a while. So it becomes a strategy to get up, to get food, to walk around, to look out the window, to change activity. All of these behaviors look like they're ADD or ADHD behaviors, but they're really a compensatory strategy to say, hey, I can't do this anymore. It's not working, and it's too painful, and if I take a break, I can come back and do it for a longer time. So watch the behaviors, because they may be telling you something totally different. What happens because of Erlin is you'll see that the child will be losing their place, skipping words, skipping lines, going and rereading the same line again, having to reread for comprehension. Obviously looking up, looking away, and taking breaks. I gave you another case study here about Joseph, who had problems in school. He couldn't stay focused and was easily distracted. And what his mother kept saying and the teachers kept saying is, just try harder. Just focus. Pay attention. You can do it. It was not until he was 37 years of age that he was finally diagnosed as having ADD. He tried Adderall and it didn't help. But what he didn't realize until he was tested for Erlen, what was going on is that for him, the words were running together and he couldn't tell where one word stopped and the next word started. He was seeing rivers running down the pages. There were glowing images that floated on top, and he just couldn't focus on the page for any length of time. It was too bothersome, and he couldn't read it. So, this is kind of what the page looked like in terms of the rivers and the words being mushed and merging together, but you're missing the glowing and the other things that can happen as well. But at least this gives you an idea of what he was trying to read versus what you look at when you're reading a printed page. How to identify if it's Erlen and not attention deficit disorder? One, ask a couple of easy questions. Ask your child how they feel by the end of the school day. Do they have a headache? Do they have a stomach ache? If they're tired. Ask them how they feel in dim lighting. Is it more comfortable? Is it easier for them to read in dim lighting than when they have to read in school under the fluorescent lighting? Ask them how things look on the printed page after a while when they've been reading in fluorescent lighting, and ask what it's like when they read in dim lighting. Your child and even adults don't know to report these problems because they happen all the time, so they're a baseline and think, this is normal. This is what happens not just for me, but for everybody. And shouldn't it happen? Nobody tells me that it shouldn't. You have to ask the questions. In addition, be an observer. Observe the behaviors. Look at when they happen and observe under what conditions they're happening. Look for consistency of behavior, because if it's Erlen, it's going to happen under fluorescent lighting with visually intensive activities, but not when they're playing, not in dim lighting. If it's ADD or ADHD, there's a consistency for the behavior. It's going to happen regardless of the environment and regardless of what the tasks that they are doing. And remember, if it's Erlen, there's a hereditary component, and it should be running in families. You should see other family members who are light sensitive, other family members who build breaks into reading. So I'm going to reinforce this concept of consistency. If it's Erlen, the behavior is inconsistent in the sense that you'll see it with schoolwork, but not when they're playing games, not when they're sitting at the table and eating. If it's ADD or ADHD, when they're playing games, when they're doing things that they're enjoying, even they can't sit at the dinner table, they're up and moving around constantly. So there's a real difference in the behavior and their attention, their ability to sit still and focus, versus if it's ADD or ADHD, where it happens all of the time, regardless of what they are doing. So the solution, if it's Erlen, is to use what we call colored overlays or special Erlen spectral filters, which are designed for each person individually, because everybody's brain is different, and the areas of the brain that are being affected are different for every individual. And we also deal with environmental modifications. So we talk about the fact that it's important to let the child read in dim lighting, that it's not going to hurt their eyes. Indirect natural lighting, let them sit near a window, that's better. Let them wear a hat with the brim. These are all easy solutions that will help. So what is going on here is the fact that for individuals who have Erlen, when visual information is not read by the eye, it's read by the brain. And it goes to the brain, the information is converted into wavelengths of light, which are just color. If you take light and you put it through a prism, it breaks out into all the colors of the rainbow. And for those who have Erlen, there are certain of those colors or wavelengths of light that are creating all these problems. And what we do when we figure out and create the Erlen filters that are worn as glasses or contact lenses, we figure out which of those specific wavelengths of light we have to filter, and if we have to filter it, how much? Because you don't want to filter it too much or too little. It's really an exact science, and you don't want to filter any of the colors or wavelengths that you shouldn't filter. And when you get it right, you change the brain. You calm the brain down. You eliminate all the distortions that they experience in their environment. And on the printed page, whether they're reading music or numbers or reading off of the board or reading textbooks. And when you calm the brain down, you change your autonomic nervous system is calmed down, you change your neurotransmitters. This is the same thing that they're trying to do with drugs, is to calm the brain down or change the brain, make the areas that are overactive and less active and the underactive areas more active, and changing the neurotransmitters. We're doing it for those who have Erlen in a very non-evasive, non-drug oriented way. So let me show you the differences in the brain patterns for somebody who has Erlen. And this is somebody reading on the computer. They've done a SPECT scan to measure areas of overactivity and underactivity. The area that is white is the area that is overactive and not performing. And if you look at the slide on your left, the first slide on the top down at the bottom, that's your visual cortex. And if you look at it, it's really working way, way too hard. But what you notice is the fact that other parts of the brain are also lit up. If you look right in the middle, right above the visual cortex in the middle of the brain, there's an area called the basal ganglia area, the lymphatic system that is responsible for anxiety and irritability. What you can't tell here is the fact that the very front part of the brain is underactive, and that's the executive functioning, the planning, the organization. That's underactive and not performing well. If you look at the slides on the right, this is somebody doing the same activity but wearing Erlen spectral filters. And you can see the difference between how much the brain is calmed down. And so we no longer have this massive overactivity, underactivity. Here's another slide. If you're interested in becoming a screener, we have 2-day workshops that are taught by diagnosticians throughout the world in 54 countries, and to visit www.erlen.com. And we do it with contact lens. We change, and then to go on to the next step, which is the Erlen filters, which are done as lenses or contact lenses, so you can work smarter, not harder. And let me leave you with some resources, including my 2 books, Reading by the Colors, and my most recent book, The Erlen Revolution, which has a whole chapter on how ADD and ADHD versus how to determine if you have Erlen versus ADD or ADHD. And get onto the YouTube, because if you do YouTubes, there's some interesting YouTubes. So I'm sorry I went a little over. I thank you for staying with you. I apologize for the problems, and I'm looking forward to see if we have any questions that you'd like me to answer. Okay, what is casein? I'm going to say to you, get online, because it's a little complicated. Look up gluten and look up casein, and you're going to get some descriptions about gluten and casein. They're hard diets because you really have to eliminate everything in the diet that is related to any type of wheat or wheat product if you're gluten sensitive and casein sensitive. So let me have you get online for that. Question 2. As a teacher, how are we supposed to help the children know whether they need to eat more regularly? Good question. Simply ask the child. I always do this. Just ask the children to tell you how they feel. If they have snacks, ask them if they're hungry by snack time. And if they are, what happens? How do they know they're hungry? What tells them that they're hungry? Ask them what happens to them at lunchtime. Are they a little bit hungry, middle, or very hungry? And if so, how do they know? Does their stomach feel empty? Does it growl? Or do they get stomach aches? Or do they get headaches? Or do they feel irritable? Okay? You have to ask the questions. You have to ask them, how do they feel by the end of the school day? Because we're not giving kids snacks, and some of these kids, you're losing them. So what happens if you don't pay attention to these kids? You lose them before lunch, the periods before lunch, and by the end of the school day. And how much easier it is for you as a teacher to feed them, keep them calmer and more concentrated. What an easy thing to do. Here's the next question. Since fluorescent lighting is so bad for many of us, will we be able to get a doctor's prescription for non-fluorescent light bulbs? Okay. If you're not aware of the fact, there is coming up in 2012, there's going to be a ban on incandescent lighting. It's not going to meet the criteria. And they're going to force everybody in the homes to do the swirly light bulbs or LED lights. What's going to happen is the fact that the manufacturer is going to stop producing them. Canada has just now looked at this. They were going to go for 2012, and they're starting to go, wait a minute, there are issues going on here. You have mercury in your fluorescent lights, you have arsenic in your LED lights. What are we doing to our environment? What's the potential impact of this? And the fact, what about freedom of choice? And is this really an energy saving? All the research has said people keep on the fluorescent lights at home longer, and it is an energy saving. That in the countries where it's cold, the incandescent lighting would help warm it up, so now that they have to use more heat. So the whole basis for this is go green is not proving to be a point. My problem is if it really passes, you know that there was just a bill that they tried to get through the House to stop this and to allow people to be able to have freedom of choice, and the bill did not pass. They're going to try to get it passed again. We have a petition on my website, www.erlin.com. If you're interested in signing the petition, get your friends to sign the petition. Talk to your legislators. Talk to your people in the legislature and in Congress and say to them, we need to stop this ban. It's not good. We keep trying to say it affects people, not just those who have Erlin syndrome. It affects a lot of people with a lot of diseases who cannot handle fluorescent lighting. Lupus, autoimmune diseases, diabetes are being affected by fluorescent lighting negative effects. It's a huge issue. If you're not aware of it, be aware of it. Right now I'm pretty pessimistic about what's going to happen. A lot of my clients are stockpiling light bulbs because they're afraid they're not going to be able to buy them, because once 2012 comes around, they're not going to be manufactured. GE is dying to close all their plants in the U.S. that manufacture your incandescent bulbs, because all their factories for fluorescent lighting are over in China. It's a real cost savings for GE to be doing this. Anyway, and we bought into it. Okay, enough of that one. Here's another question. My 7-year-old son wants to know, is it common to see colors? He has Erlin glasses. You know what you need to do on this one, since it's a question that kind of relates personally to you. Would you send me an email? You can send it through the website. I'm going to communicate back and forth with you because I need to have more clarification about this. I need to be able to talk to your son. So send me an email and we'll discuss it. And I'm not sure what he says, but let me just kind of broad base this a little bit, in the sense that with Erlin filters, colors should look normal. White should look white, and all colors should look normal. Okay? I still want to hear from you. Please send me an email. Okay. Next question. So many people do not believe in Erlin. Yes, you would think after 30 years. But I will say to you that so many people also don't believe in ADD or ADHD, so we're in good company. All right. How do we, as screeners, convince administrators and teachers, that this could be a problem? Great question. Excellent question. First of all, as screeners, you have my introduction letter that explains the problem and talks about the research, and then you have the bibliography of the research so that they cannot say that there is no research. The other thing that I would suggest that you do is screen a child to take one of your children where it makes a huge difference, a significant difference in their flow, fluency, or ability to read, with and without the overlay, and have this child and their parent present before the school board, or show your principal and have your principal come in and see for himself or herself the difference that it makes for this child to use their overlay. You need to know as well that we can send you the information. There are a lot of states that have accepted the use of overlays as a standard accommodation that does not need a 504 plan or an IEP for the child to be able to use an overlay for standardized testing, which means it's become an accepted accommodation. So if it's accepted accommodation, that's another way of saying to your principal, hey, come on, get up, get on board. You're not going to have to put even a 504 in place for the child to be able to use it, but we have to be able to identify and know what is the correct color or combination of colors for the child to use in order to benefit from this. Also, get onto Facebook and post this question on the Irwin Facebook page. It's a great dialogue. See what other people are saying and what other screeners have tried to do that have been successful. And as well, hopefully you're getting the Irwin news alerts, because I post other things that screeners and teachers have done to get I post a lot of information. If you're not getting the Irwin news alert and you want to get it, even if you're not a screener, again, write to us and let us know. All right? And I could talk about this one, anapnosia, because it's a huge issue for me. I think it's tragic that we're missing 26% of the school-age children who could benefit from using overlays, and the statistics are 46% of those who are being identified with a reading problem, learning disability, or dyslexia need Irwin filters. Okay? Next question. What about the light in the schools? Will they make them change as well? Well, you already have fluorescent lights in school, so it's a problem. You'll keep the fluorescent lights. It's just what's going to happen now as a result of the 2012 is that you will not be allowed, you won't be allowed, but you'll have to switch to all that will be available even in the home is fluorescent lighting or LED lighting. So that's the difference. It's now going to go into the home as well as being in the schools and the workplace. Okay, I can't wait to get back to school and screen a student with ADHD. Most of my students who I screen may need filters. Are they affordable for them? Yeah, you know, what's really true is if they have ADD or ADHD, the overlays are not enough. They're going to have to get their own filters because we're going to have to calm their whole environment down because they're under fluorescent lighting. Are they affordable? Again, I don't know if you're in the U.S. or not. Compared to medication? Yeah, if you think about how much is being spent on medication, how much is being spent on biofeedback or neurofeedback as other alternatives, on counseling, on tutoring or remediation, your own filters are a lot less expensive than any of those other methods or processes that are being used as alternatives. In addition, be aware that there are certain groups such as Lions Club that if the parents cannot afford the testing and their own spectral filters, that Lions Club, they can do a presentation to Lions Club or even sometimes Rotary. Any of these clubs want to be helpful and they have the money and the funding to be able to do it, but you need to go to them and ask, okay? The testing is going to run, and it kind of varies from country to country and state to state, but the testing is pretty much the most expensive part of the whole process and can run $200, $300. The tinting itself may run $100 or so, and then of course if they do not wear prescription lenses, you have to have lenses and frames as well. So the whole process could run as much as $500. But think about how much you spend in terms of vision training, which is $10,000 to $20,000 from session after session. How much neurofeedback and biofeedback runs you, counseling sessions will run you. In the long term, it's probably the least, from what I hear from the parents who come in and have done all these things, it's probably the least expensive method out there to address these issues. How do we get the 2J training? Yay! I got some of you interested in becoming your own screen. It's fabulous. What I want you to do is get online, go onto www.erlin.com, get into where we go to seminars and training, and it will give you the information about how to sign up, and it gives you a list of individuals who are doing trainings and the dates they're doing the trainings and where they're doing the training, and you can contact them. Of course, you can always come and get trained by me here in Long Beach, California. So everyone is welcome to do that. Okay. But how are children supposed to know this and make the teachers believe them? Oh, interesting question. How are the children supposed to know? They're not going to know. They're not going to know unless they're screened by a screener, unless the parent gets the child screened. Otherwise, no, you're not going to know. And yes, it's going to take a professional to write a report to state this is what is happening to the child and this is what the child needs. I will tell you, in terms of looking at a lot of our students who are thinking about the standard SATs and PSATs to get into college when they have problems with fluorescent lighting, even with or without their Erlin filters, another standard accommodation that they don't even know that they can request is they can request to take these tests in a room without fluorescent lighting. So that they can attend and concentrate better and they can get better scores, which is critical for college entrance. All right? If both parents have ADD but are undiagnosed, is it a good chance that their child will be also? Loaded question. Again, ADD is also, and I'm not sure if you're saying ADD here or misdiagnosis of it, saying that they both look like they have ADD and have Erlin syndrome. Either way, ADD is hereditary and Erlin syndrome is hereditary. But even if you both have ADD, it's still a 50-50 chance that your child will have it. Again, watch the behaviors, ask the questions. If you want a copy of my PowerPoint, you can sign up and get a copy of the PowerPoint. In addition, you can get online into the website and scan down in the section called Who We Can Help to ADD, Attention Deficit Disorder, and we will give you questions and indicators, and we will give you self-tests that you can have ask your child or you can take. So there's a lot of information on the website and also in my book, The Erlin Revolution. Okay. Then back to me. Sorry, I misunderstood. I was hoping the lighting was being changed to benefit the schools. No! But what you can do to change the lighting, if you're a teacher and you're in school, if you want to calm your class down and have a calmer class overall, what I would suggest you do is you reduce your lighting by about half, and you can see the difference. And you can do that by asking the custodian to get in there and turn some of the bulbs off. you don't turn, you just switch them, you don't take them out. And you can cut your lighting down by half. You can create areas in your room where all the bulbs are turned off, there's no fluorescent lighting. You can create areas that are fully fluorescent lights and areas that are really dim where the bulbs are all turned off. So you create different lighting environments. If you're in a room that has lots of natural lighting, stop and think, why are you even turning on the fluorescent lights? You don't need to. If you don't need to, don't. You're going to have a much calmer class and a much more attentive class. And as a teacher, you're going to have a class that you're going to be better able to handle. Every teacher says, wow, it's wonderful the difference it makes when I don't have all my fluorescent lighting on. So the next question is back to, so dim lighting does not hurt the eyes? Right. That is a myth. Dim lighting does not hurt the eyes. If you have Irlen syndrome, what hurts your eyes is bright lighting. So let me say that 15 times. For those who have Irlen syndrome, dim lighting does not hurt your eyes. In general, dim lighting doesn't hurt your eyes. Yeah, when you get old like me, the more lighting, the better to see. But and you're going to actually turn on more lights. But in general, for school-age children and students, no, dim lighting is not going to hurt their eyes. And then again, I thought you have to strain to read when the lighting is dim. Ask anybody who has Irlen syndrome, and they will tell you that they strain to read in bright lights and in fluorescent lighting. And we've seen millions and millions of children, students, and adults by this time, and this is consistent if you have Irlen syndrome, that dim lighting makes it easier because it reduces the physical symptoms and reduces the distortions. And I know that's a hard concept if you've been brought up with bright lighting is better, and it will, you need to have bright lighting. It is not true for those who have Irlen syndrome. Thank you. Good. We all get to go home and have dinner now. Thank you for joining me. It's been a pleasure. And I am wrapping it up and letting you all know that if you have any further questions, you can email me and get onto the website. Thank you for joining, and let others know that they can as well come online at any time that they want to and sign up and still see this webinar. So spread the word and let other people know. Thank you. Good night, everybody.